No one ever talks about Abraham's other wife in Genesis chapter 25. Usually people will focus on the very odd origin story of Jacob and Esau, but are these two ideas possibly related? See, there are some questions that need to be answered. For example, why is Rebekah unable to have children? Why are Jacob and Esau fighting in the womb of Rebekah? And why is the first Jacob and Esau story about food and a birthright? This story sounds a lot like Genesis 3. So let's go ahead and jump into this wild sequence of events in Genesis 25. This kind of Bible study might be new for many of you. So if you're not familiar with this approach to meditating on Scripture and this format of Bible study, I encourage you to hang around, see what we're all about. And if you have not watched the last episode of this Genesis series on Genesis 24 or our other Genesis teachings, I would highly recommend you go watch those. Not that you have to, but Genesis chapter 25 is where we find ourselves in this session. Abraham is said to take another wife, and this chapter comes right after Isaac ends up being comforted by his new wife, Rebekah, in regards to his mother's death. He was in mourning, and Rebekah comes on the scene as a wife who's given to Isaac. Go watch the episode before this. And this seems to comfort Isaac in his mourning over his mom being taken. Abraham takes another wife. I wonder why. Just right out the gate, we're looking at Abraham getting another wife, and her name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, and Lumim. First Chronicles actually tells us that this was Abraham's concubine. If you go and read that, Abraham and Isaac, apparently the last chapter, Isaac got a wife, and now Abraham gets another wife. And both seem to be reacting to the loss of Sarah, right? And so these children right here, weirdly enough, the sons of Midian, all these were the children of Keturah. What's interesting to me is that they're not referred to as the children of Abraham. It doesn't mean they're not the children of Abraham. They physically descend from him, but they're referred to as the children of Keturah. And is that intentional? Is there something we're supposed to recognize about this? I think so, because of where the story is going with Isaac becoming the, taking the spotlight now in the story. He's going to be the main focus. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. That's why I go there. Because Abraham ends up giving everything he has to Isaac. Not the other children of Keturah, not Ishmael. He gives everything to his one true son, his firstborn, his heir, Isaac. And then verse 6, to the sons of his concubines, Abraham, which I think is interesting because there's multiple concubines, meaning Abraham had more than one. And so are we supposed to see this as referring to Hagar as well and Ishmael, or are there others beyond Keturah and Hagar that we're not told about? Either way, we at least know there's Hagar and there's Keturah. Abraham gives gifts while he was still living. He sent them away from his son Isaac. Notice the focus on Isaac in this story. And they're sent where? They're sent eastward to the east country. And we've already seen this theme throughout the biblical story of humanity being driven further and further east, which is to note further and further separation, you might say, from the ideal, being life with God in the garden. And it says he gave gifts to his concubines' children, but we just were told that he gave everything he had to Isaac. So is this just referring to Abraham gave everything that mattered to Isaac, and then whatever was left over that didn't really matter, he gave that to his concubine sons? Either way, they're sent eastward. And if you read the story about Ishmael and Hagar, they were sent away, seemingly further east, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that. But Abraham sends them away. That's the same language right here. He sent them away. And I think that's intentional. Those who won't carry Abraham's name as true descendants or as the true heir, they're sent further east, as the story of the Bible continues to emphasize how humanity's pushed farther and farther away from that Edenic ideal. And Abraham is essentially making it clear in these first 6 verses who is going to carry his name, who's going to, carry his lineage as the true rightful heir and be the appointed owner of all his estate. And it ends up being Isaac. Verse 7, these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last, and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. This section right here, I think, is important to recognize the transition in the story. We're going from Abraham, and now the story is shifting with the focus being on Isaac. Okay, so I think this is evidence that the story has already somewhat shifted onto Isaac as the main carrier of the name, the seed of the woman, whom we're expecting the Messiah will eventually come on the scene, and Isaac ends up being a part of his genealogy. Verse 9, Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried Abraham in the cave of Machpelah. We saw that in the last chapter, or 2 chapters ago, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite. Once again, this emphasis on it being east of Mamre. It's interesting that only Ishmael and Isaac are mentioned to have buried Abraham. Where are the other kids? We haven't really seen Ishmael and Isaac come together in the story since Ishmael was sent away a few chapters ago, many chapters ago actually. And Abraham ends up being buried in the very cave that he purchased as a burial site for his family. And he's buried in the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah, his wife. So it seems as though the story is really wanting us to know that Sarah is considered to be the true wife of Abraham. He had Hagar, he had Keturah, he had this possibly other women that aren't named in the story, maybe. But only Sarah is considered to be his true wife. And after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son. Notice the language. We're now shifting from Abraham on to Isaac. The blessing of Abraham's extended to Isaac, his true firstborn heir. And now God will continue working with this family through Isaac. And Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. Once again, Isaac being the true heir of Abraham, and God confirms this by blessing Isaac. So we're about to see what this blessing looks like. It involves Isaac settling, at least. But God is confirming, just like he told Abraham that he would bless his descendants and keep the promises that he made to Abraham in Genesis 15. Isaac is the one who carries this all the way through to the end. Then Jacob, and then it gets passed on. So Isaac seems to have settled with his new wife in Hebron in the last chapter. But now, as the new patriarch, he seems to be living here in Beer Lahai Roi. And if you remember the last study, we talked about how that's where God found Hagar by a well. And the well, this specific location, is named after the fact that God saw her. Right? So a question we have is, are Hagar and Ishmael still living in that region of the Paran still? Because that's where this well is, which is the region that Isaac is living at now. And is there possibly a connection between God's blessing or favor on Isaac here and the place that Isaac chooses to dwell and live in? In other words, is it his choice to live there as a response to God's blessing? Or is it because he's blessed, God has favored him to live there specifically? Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you on our website at abovereproachministry.com. Maybe you want to learn how to study the Bible. We have free Bible classes just for you. Are you maybe a newer believer? Go ahead and check out our Christianity 101 Foundations course. Maybe you hate videos. Well, we have a podcast, so you can listen to all of our messages on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Maybe you want to join or start a discussion group. Check out our map of all the current armed discussion groups all around the world. And do you maybe live near Greenville, South Carolina? If you do, you should check out our church. Visit movementchurchsc.com for more information. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, or head over to the donate page and donate through debit or credit card, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, Patreon, or even mail a check to P.O. Box 509, Inman, South Carolina. And if you want to make a ministry connection, feel free to reach out to me on our website. All right, I know that was a lot, but I'm done. So let's get back to the video. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Hera's servant, bore to Abraham. As if we forgot who Hagar was. But it's interesting that we're given the Ishmael's generations right now. You know, why are we given the generations of Ishmael at this moment in the story? I would like to suggest because this is one of the last times Ishmael gets any airtime in the story. The next time will be in Genesis 28 when Esau is said to be taking a wife from Ishmael's clan. And then in Genesis 36 we have a reference to a daughter of Ishmael. In other words, Ishmael will just be referenced in passing. He will not have as much of airtime in the story as he's had with Hagar in previous chapters. So these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. I'm not even going to try and say these names. Go and read them yourself. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages, by their encampments. It's interesting that there are specifically 12 princes according to their tribes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right here. And Nebaioth. So we got 12 princes of Ishmael, and these are the years of their life. Ishmael, or rather, years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last, just like Abraham, and he died and was gathered to his people. So Ishmael's 89, if we do our math correctly. Ishmael's 89 when Abraham died, which means Ishmael lived another 48 years after Abraham died. And what's interesting is that Ishmael is not said to be gathered to Abraham's people, but Ishmael is gathered to his people. Right? Abraham's buried in a cave where Ishmael isn't said to be gathered to Abraham's people or buried in the cave where his father's household is buried. Rather, it appears as though Ishmael has his own separate people, that it seems to be distinct from the people of Abraham and Israel. And they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt, in the direction of Assyria. And so he settled over against all his kinsmen. We'll focus on this in a second. But for now, right here, where he settles, I think is significant because we're told the territory of Ishmael and its proximity is to Egypt and Assyria, which if you remember, if you've read the Old Testament, these are two of the most prominent nations and key figures of the ancient world. And then this is an interesting statement. He settled over against all his kinsmen. Right? The phrase here can mean to settle over or to fall over against his kinsmen. Either way, it means a kind of opposition to. In Genesis 16, verse 12, God actually told Hagar that her son Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man, which, what a prophecy. And that his hand would be against everyone, right? And that he would dwell over against all his kinsmen. And that's what we're told verbatim about 9 chapters later right here in Genesis 25:18. So, just as God said would happen, Ishmael seems to be this man of conflict, at least, possibly violence. And these are the generations of Isaac. Right? So now we're moving on to the actual true son of Abraham, who is considered to be the heir of the estate, the one who continues the name and the legacy of Abraham. This is Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 42 when he took Rebekah. You can start to do the math here. The daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. So the number 40 is significant in Scripture. I'm not saying that the number, let me say it like this. The number 40 usually is associated with a time of testing. 40 days of Noah, 40 days spies are in the promised land, 40 days Moses on Sinai, 40 days Jesus tested in the wilderness, 40 days Goliath taunting Israel, testing them, 40 years of wandering in the wilderness for Israel. So I wonder, could there be any hint of that here with Isaac being 40? I think there is a hint of that, meaning the number 40 here associated with a time of testing. We're about to be told in the next verse that essentially Isaac and his wife Rebekah, for 20 years of their marriage, she's barren and they have no children, which sounds a lot like Abraham and Sarah, Isaac's mom and dad. So Isaac ends up praying to the Lord for his wife right here because she was barren. So at 40 they get married. They don't have kids until he's 60. 20 years of waiting, that's a time of testing. That's a kind of test for Abraham or Isaac and Rebekah to go through and to deal with and really to pass. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. This becomes the foundation, I think, for everything we're about to see transpire with Jacob and Esau. Not just as individuals, but later on as nations, what their future as nation people hold. And the Lord granted his prayer. So we have this being an answer to prayer, this coming from barrenness, God answering and giving life to a barren womb. That becomes the foundation of the Jacob and Esau story. And so a question we should be asking, not that we can really answer it, but just to consider, is why is Rebekah barren? Like, if Isaac is blessed, just like we were told a few verses ago, why is his wife dealing with barrenness? What's interesting is that Abraham and Sarah were also barren, but Abraham didn't wait 60 years for his promised son. He had to wait 100. And we're going to see the same with Jacob, the next heir. His wife Rachel, the one that he prefers and loves, she will be barren until the Lord opens her womb. And so, a question that we have as we look at Abraham and Isaac and Jacob is, why do the patriarchs seem to deal with barrenness, not being able to produce offspring? Because we're told that Rebekah's barren for 20 years, Isaac's 40, and then 60 when they have a child. And we've seen Abraham in Genesis 20 do something similar. And if you remember a few episodes ago, in Genesis 20, Abimelech's wife and the women in his household, they are barren. They are not able to conceive. And God commissions Abraham to pray for Abimelech and his household. And Abraham kind of plays that priestly role in mediating for Abimelech and his household through prayer. And God answers and opens Abimelech's wife's womb and the women in the household, and they're able to conceive. And now Isaac steps into that same kind of role as the new patriarchal head that mediates through prayer, that God seems to answer the prayers of to bring life where there's barrenness. And so Abraham prayed several times, and God heeded his request. If you remember, there were several times that took place with Abimelech, in regards to Lot being saved. I can't think of another. There's probably another example. But now we're seeing God answer Isaac's prayers, as if part of what it means for Isaac to be blessed is that the same way God related to Abraham in answering his prayers, not to say that he had a 100% success prayer rate, but to say that God regarded his prayers, and Abraham played a mediator kind of role for several individuals. Well, now Isaac's stepping into that gig. And so even though it took 20 years, we see God confirming Isaac over the course of 20 years. He's confirming Isaac as the true heir by answering his prayer. And this will be a continual theme throughout the Bible, which is that God brings life from barrenness. And the children are said to be struggling within her. Right here. And I cannot help but notice almost the narrative seeds that have been planted in the earlier portion of this chapter, which is that we saw the sons of Keturah, and then we have Isaac, and then we have Ishmael. There's not like this very clear and direct statement about their struggle and strife. But you're supposed to read this story and be like, there seems to be like something wrong with this family dynamic. Some things are happening. And then we see right here with Jacob and Esau in the womb of Rebekah, struggling together within her. So there is going to be that theme that carries throughout the scriptures as well, which is kind of this like family internal strife, this familial division and disagreement and strife, and possibly that culminates in Jesus saying, look, I came to bring a sword and to divide households, those who are for me from those who are not. And I think this is a connection to Genesis chapter 4, rather an allusion, where we see Cain and Abel and their brotherly conflict very clearly stated with the aggressive violence of Cain against Abel. And we see Rebekah now about to ask a very genuine question. Watch. So she's feeling this wrestling. She can't quite put her finger on it. And she goes, if it is like this, why? Why is this happening to me? So I love what she does. She goes to inquire of the Lord. In other words, it seems as though God answers their prayer, Isaac's prayer, in a very discreet way, rather than, it doesn't seem as though God went, Isaac and Rebekah, you have now conceived. I have done my job. Rather, it's like God fills her womb with life, and she's taken notice of that, going, did I just have some bad Hebrew pizza? Or is there something going on? And she inquires of God. And we see Rebekah asking genuine questions and wondering, just as Sarah, the previous woman head of the family. She found herself wondering how God would bring them a child. And then we see Mary later on, the mother of Jesus, wondering, how will these things be? So we see this theme of like where there's barrenness and God brings life, women are trying to make sense of what's happening. But Rebekah here brings it to the Lord in prayer, just as Mary does. And so a question we should be asking is, in what way does she inquire of God? Because so far in the story of Genesis, what this has looked like is different. It's sometimes a sacrifice. Sometimes it's just prayer. Sometimes it's a kind of vision and a deep sleep. Sometimes it's a kind of worship and calling upon the name of God and building an altar. And so we should be asking, like, what did this look like? A normal calling upon the Lord? Were there food offerings and gifts? Was there sacred space? Is this a kind of pagan thing she's doing? I would say not. I don't think it is pagan because God answers her. And the children struggling within her is actually God's answer to their prayer. They wanted a child. God gives them two that struggle within her womb. God will answer. This is a kind of foreshadowing of a national struggle. Two peoples kind of going at it, They wanted children. It comes with a struggle. They don't get children without a struggle. And she brings her why to the Lord. She doesn't know what's going on or how to make sense of it. But she seeks the Lord for clarity, which is a word for us. In times of uncertainty, questions, wondering, doubt, bring that to the Lord. And the Lord answers her very clearly. The Lord answered her. Just as he just answered Isaac's prayer, now he's answering Rebekah directly. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Right? So we got one that's stronger. And then we have one that serves the younger, that being the older one. Is it that the younger one being served is the stronger? Or is it that the stronger of the 2 ends up serving the other, right? Either way, there's division. There's a national divide. And the fact that God answers may indicate that she inquired of the Lord the right way. He honors it. And it's interesting that God answered Isaac's prayer by giving a child, but God addresses her inquiry differently. He doesn't just I don't know how else God would bring clarity to the situation, but he directly and personally speaks to Rebekah. Does this imply that God did not speak with Isaac, but only with Rebekah? Right? Are we supposed, because it says the Lord said to her. It doesn't say that Isaac was or was not involved. It doesn't even say, the narrative never explicitly and directly tells us if Isaac knew this information. We're kind of left wondering, so did Rebekah end up sharing this with her husband if he wasn't told directly by God? Did she keep it a secret? Either way, God gives them a child, but he gives Rebekah understanding. Right? So here's an answer to your prayer, and Rebekah inquires, what's happening in me? And God gives understanding. The older shall serve the younger. Are these really 2 peoples inside of her wrestling for power? Do babies really do this? Or is this just an illustration, a metaphor, a symbol of their future as nation peoples? God told her either way that there were twins inside of her before they had any visible evidence. And so why does God not just tell her that she has twins? And in other words, God's answer is not necessarily a direct response to her question. In other words, God is not only answering the question Rebekah asked. God is answering more than what Rebekah inquired about. So he could have just said, you got twins in your belly, deal with it. Why the mention of nations? Why the mention of a power struggle? Why the mention of division and the older serving the younger? Why is this information that Rebekah apparently needs to know at this point in her pregnancy? This theme of God choosing the younger son will be a theme throughout the rest of the Bible, because essentially God says, hey, the older will serve the younger. This is what's going to happen. And that's going to be a theme throughout the rest of the Bible. Not to say that God has a preference or shows partiality, but oftentimes he kind of breaks out of the norm to let you know that he didn't play by man's rules. God will choose Abel. God will choose Noah. God will choose Abraham. God will choose Isaac, Moses, David, Joseph. All these not firstborn in their family. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. So you're like, what do you mean, behold? Like, you already knew that. Why is it, all of a sudden I didn't? Apparently, there was no, I guess, other evidence beyond God speaking that she indeed had two in her womb, or beyond the struggle she felt, right? So it's interesting just that, behold, there were twins, and like, oh, God wasn't lying. He told the truth. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. I want you to notice what he's named after. His hairy cloak of a body. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Okay. Notice what each brother is named after. Esau's named for his appearance, or feeling, I guess. And Jacob is named for what he does, not how he appears, not how he feels. His name literally means Jacob, he who steals, he who takes by the heel. Both of these descriptions are true of Jacob, and they will be a foreshadowing of each of their futures. Whether it's Esau, whether it's Jacob, like they're named appropriately. The hairy body, the deceiving, that will come up later as important details. And so just hold on to that. We're told why he's hairy, and we're told, we're told that he's hairy, Esau, and we're told that Jacob is grabbing the heel of Esau to let us know that, those will be important details for later on in the story, which we'll see, I think, in the next chapter or 2 chapters from now. His name's called Jacob. Isaac was 60 when she bore them. It's interesting that this whole time we're not told how old Rebekah is. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in the tents. Why does their occupation matter? There's a question I have. The last time we were told about two brothers and their different vocations, you might say, or roles, it was Cain and Abel. So we're going to see that these stories overlap quite a bit, and there's a lot of connections between Jacob and Esau and Cain and Abel. When the boys grew up, that's what they were. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah just loved Jacob. Now, did she love Jacob because she saw that Jacob wasn't loved as much as Esau? Or did she choose to love Jacob beforehand? Or is her love for Jacob like it doesn't have anything to do with Isaac's lack of love for Jacob and preference of Esau? Like, what is the reasoning there? We're at least told why Isaac loves Esau. We saw the different reasons for both of their names. Esau's name is based off his appearance, while Jacob's name is based off what he does. And now we see that Esau is loved because of what he does, what he can give his father, whereas Rebekah just loves Jacob. No specific reason is given in the text, but maybe is her love towards Jacob possibly due to what God told her, that the older would serve the younger? Either way, we're seeing kind of conditional love on the part of Isaac, and we see the preferential love on the part of both parents being a kind of favoritism, which we're going to see with Jacob and his two wives. Jacob will choose to love Rachel, not his other wife, Leah. And God will see that and will give life to the womb of Leah. And there's just a similar dynamic there. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, now this is a very interesting transition, like a very interesting first story that we're told about them. One of the only stories we're told, there's not many stories we're told about Jacob and Esau. After this, it's Jacob stealing taking the blessing from Esau, and then they come back together later on after Jacob comes from Paran. So this is like one of very few stories about them. When Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field. He was exhausted. Why are we told Esau is exhausted? How does this relate to what's about to happen? I think we're about to see that Esau is so desperate for food that he's actually not thinking straight. Because watch, Esau, out of exhaustion, says, Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew. I am exhausted. So the text literally tells us what the exhaustion has to do with the story. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Which there's a footnote here, and it says Edom sounds like the Hebrew for red. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Whoa, pause. We were just told that Isaac loved Esau because of the food Esau would prepare for his dad. And in a couple of chapters, we'll see Isaac call Esau and say, "Make me a meal and I'll give you a blessing." But Esau here is the one receiving the food and needing food. And Esau is going to be more focused on his physical cravings more than his future, more than his legacy. We're going to see him trade his birthright for some food. Hebrews will talk about how Esau despised his birthright, just as we're going to see right here. Esau literally is said to be despising his birthright. And we've already seen this kind of horrible trade happen, where someone goes, "I want food now, and you can have my birthright and my future now, and we'll trade. We'll make that horrible trade." In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve essentially trade in their birthright as rulers over the earth under God's authority, and they trade that in for the forbidden fruit that looked really good in the moment, but they regretted it later. And we're going to see Jesus faced with a very similar temptation involving food in Matthew 4. He's going to be tempted to turn stones into bread. And eventually Israel, throughout their testing in the wilderness with food, they're going to choose their physical cravings over God and their obedience to him and loyalty to him. And what's interesting is that he's called Edom based off his desire for red stew. In other words, Esau becomes known for the food he chose over his birthright. Imagine being known for that. And Jacob sees his opportunity. And I wonder, did Jacob just come up with this plan on the spot? Did he just see his opportunity and now he's about to shoot his shot? Or has he been scheming this for a while? Either way, Jacob sees a chance to take the birthright, which means it's at least something he's wanted and considered to take from his brother for some time. And the way that Jacob says, "Sell me," makes me think this is a kind of like official transaction taking place. But the payment for the food, you want this food, Esau? You want this red stew? Give me your birthright. That's the price. That's the price. And Esau says, "I'm about to die. Who cares about a birthright? What use is that to me?" And I wonder, is Esau being dramatic here? Because I've heard that's usually how Esau's, represented and characterized here. He's being so dramatic. Or is he actually like slowly dying from hunger? Because he's desperate for food. He doesn't think his birthright matters, at least compared to food. And so he must at least think he's in a desperate enough situation to justify giving up his birthright. And I wonder, Genesis 3, Matthew 4, Israel in the wilderness, all these stories are very similar in that regard. And then Jacob says, "Swear to me now." So Esau swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob's pretty much saying, "Make me the firstborn." But Jacob needs assurance. Jacob needs an oath, because Esau would be bound by that oath, which is likely in the name of the Lord, and he wouldn't be able to go back and change his mind. And I wonder, like, what did it mean for Esau to officially sell Jacob his birthright? What did this involve? Was it just a verbal contract, a verbal agreement? Why couldn't Esau just take it back and change his mind? Is it because of the oath he's bound by? He swore, and his words sealed that up. But verse 34, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread, lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way, and Esau despised his birthright." We're told nothing about bread until now. If you notice, Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. That's interesting. And why does he only give the stew to Esau once Esau has sworn to give him his birthright? It sounds like, again, how Eve gave the fruit to Adam to eat, and in doing so they forfeited their authority and their birthright as God's rulers on the earth. And he eats, drinks, and rises, and this is weirdly enough, it's to note, like, I don't know, possibly how foolish of a decision it was. Like, it really didn't take long to eat that, get up, and leave. Like, it was a very, quick, satisfying of the flesh. Kind of like how we know sin feels like at times. Or like, that was really quick and didn't feel like I thought it would. And is that possibly what this is indicating with Esau? There's similar language that's actually used to describe what Israel did with the golden calf at the base of Mount Sinai. They're said to be eating, drinking, rising up to play, and then they end up experiencing judgment for their rebellion. And Hebrews will later on comment on Esau here as seeking a chance to repent and change his mind, but he was found like unable to do so. And either way, Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of stew and bread, which means Esau said, you know what's more valuable than my birthright? A temporary meal that's going to pass through me as quickly as I eat it. And so that's the temporary nature of temptation, is that it appeals to us in the moment, but it never satisfies and doesn't last as long as we'd hoped. It doesn't give us, it always overpromises. And Esau didn't recognize the value of his birthright as the firstborn. It meant so little to him. And eventually, again, Hebrews 12 will comment on this later on, as weirdly enough, Esau will be referred to as unholy and even sexually immoral in Hebrews chapter 12. Partly because he's said to be rejecting, he desired to inherit the blessing, but he was rejected because he sold his birthright. So this right here is a huge deal for Esau to think so little of his role as the next in line to continue the name of his father. His mind was not on that, not on future, not on what mattered, but it was on temporary pleasure and physical cravings and needs, not on things that would ultimately matter more in the future. Which is a word for many of us. Don't trade in your birthright for a bowl of stew. In terms of the daily call to obey God and not give in to temptation, because sin always overpromises and underdelivers. So that is Genesis chapter 25. Not to say that Esau necessarily sinned here, but the ideas carry over neatly when it comes to temptation. Cain, if Esau is very similar to Cain, God told Cain, hey, sin's knocking at the door. Its desires to consume you. It's crouching like an animal waiting to devour, kind of like how Satan is said to be prowling around like a lion. And Cain gave in to that temporary feeling of just rage and aggression and violence and jealousy, and killed his brother Abel. So in the next chapter, or rather next session, we'll tackle Genesis 26. But in the meantime, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.